We're talking today with Ryan Klingeman of Zeeland, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Ryan, start off with some background, like where and when were you born?
I was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan, November 2, 1981.
Okay, and did you grow up in Grand Rapids or move around?
When I was 3, we moved to Allendale and grew up and went to high school there, graduated from Allendale High School.
Okay, and what did your family do for a living while you were growing up?
My dad works at Steelcase, he still works there.
Mm-hmm.
He's been there since 1979, and my mom drives a school bus for Allendale.
Okay, and was she doing that when you were a kid too, or did she pick that up later?
She picked that up when we got old enough to be on our own.
Okay, let's see, and when did you finish high school?
I graduated in the year 2000.
Okay, and what did you do after you got out?
I came here to Grand Valley on scholarship for cross country and track.
Mm-hmm.
And did 2 years here before the 9/11 happened. I started thinking about that for a little bit more and joined up with the Marines.
Okay, now how did you learn about 9/11?
I was here at class and all of a sudden there was a lot of commotion of people saying, you gotta watch TV, and so I was living at Laker Village at the time on campus here, and quick went over there and started watching it.
All right. And then how long did it take you to make the decision to go in the service?
It was about another year, a little less than a year.
Can you explain a little bit of the thought process for that?
Well, it was pretty scary for everybody watching terrorists fly planes into the building, and I realized that if these were just, after we found out who was doing it, if these were some goat herders, you know, from Afghanistan, what could Saddam Hussein do? And that was starting up at that time, and that was really the big decision, that there was so many different groups out there. I thought I should do my part. Coming from a military family, it was my grandfathers were both in the World War II, and great-grandfathers were in wars, and it's going back from there.
Okay. Was your father in the service, or was
No,
his timing bad for that?
He just missed the Vietnam draft,
Mm-hmm.
so he was, I think, 1 or 2 years away from being drafted.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so all right, and then how did you decide on a branch of service?
Well, I had a lot of friends. We were always competitive growing up that all were joining at this time. Some were going in the Air Force, and no one was doing Marines, and I had always thought they were pretty tough from old movies, and
Mm-hmm.
I thought I would like to try that out.
Okay, and so what's the actual process then for enlisting you and processing and so forth?
Well, they have a program called DEP program, and it's to get people ready for this. But I went in, and I was already in really good shape, and I had some college education, so I was able to score high on all their stuff. So I was able to, from the time I went to the recruiting office to when I was leaving for boot camp, was 2 weeks. Most people take months, and so.
Okay, and then, so did you do aptitude tests and things?
Correct.
Initially? Okay.
Yes, they had to go to Lansing to take a ASVAB, and then they do a health background check and everything else.
And did they sort of physically test you at all, or just?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to, they make you do a series of picking up objects and checking out your body to make sure you don't have anything wrong with you.
Okay. All right, so you're going to go through that, and then where do you go for boot camp?
I went out to San Diego, so MCRD, right next to the airport.
Okay. Now, in the Vietnam era, that going out there was kind of an adventure, and you go in the middle of the night, and there are people yelling at you and all this kind of stuff.
Yes.
What's the arrival process like for you there?
Well, when you land in San Diego Airport, you can look out your window as you're landing and see the obstacle course and everything, and it really dawns on you that that's your home. And it doesn't really hit you until they usher you into the USO, where you wait at the airport, and then they gather everybody up and put you on a bus. And once those guys get you on that bus and tell you to put your heads down and you can't look anywhere, you realize what you're in.
Had anybody told you anything about the Marines or how they dealt with people coming in, or you just saw it in movies?
Yes, my great uncle he was in the Marines. He was one of the original Marine Raiders, and he didn't want to give away too many of the secrets. He just said, "It's a good time. You'll never forget it."
Mm-hmm.
So that was all I knew.
Okay. Now, how long did the bus ride take?
Oh, that didn't take long at all. It was right 15 minutes.
Okay. So they didn't drive you around in circles for a while first?
No.
Okay. So they improved there. Okay. You get there. Now, what time of day is it that you show up?
It was nighttime. And the drill instructor came on the bus and screamed, and everybody get off the bus, get on my yellow footprints. And
Okay. And did he use language that simple?
not at all. Very colorful language, as you can imagine.
Okay. So you go out, stand on the footprints, and now follow us through the rest of what they do with you after you arrive.
After that, there's a lot of yelling and hustling you in lines, and you get issued some gear, you get your hair cut, and then they eventually file you into a room where you, at this point, you've been up for a long time, and they start doing paperwork and making sure you didn't lie on your forms, and this lasts for hours while people are falling asleep. They're coming around and scaring you, and then you go into reception, which is just a squad bay that they make you clean, and you start getting used to a little bit while you wait for Black Friday when you get picked up by your platoons for the rest of boot camp.
Okay. So while you're in the reception area, was that just like one day, or are you there several days?
I was there for 3 days.
Okay.
They're waiting to get the full amount for platoons to start the next group going through. So.
Next round of training. All right. Now explain a little bit then the actual training program.
The training program, everybody, no matter what job you have, what your MOS is, goes through the same thing. Except it's all the guys together. I don't know how that is anymore, but so yeah, you start out with phase 1, and you're treated like dirt, and it's rough. I remember the first encounter I had was laughing because they say some pretty hilarious stuff to people, getting in your heads, and I got blasted, and I got knocked down on the footlocker, and that's when I knew that, holy cow, they can touch you here.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. So that opened up a whole new world of pain, but it's all for a reason.
Okay. Then sort of how quickly did you sort of learn the system or figure out what you had to do?
Very quick. Luckily I was in good shape, and there was nothing that I was doing wrong. I was just staying in the pack. We did our runs, and I had no problem with that. And any of the physical things or anything that would have singled you out, I just kept doing what I needed to do, yelled at the top of my lungs when they talked to me, and look straight ahead, just do what they say.
Okay. Now, when people messed up at this stage, would they get just dealt with individually, or is the group punished, or what happens?
At first it was a lot of individual stuff being punished, and then it became more of a group thing. It was everybody paid the price for a mistake.
And why was that done?
For the same reason, you're training there for combat basically, and so when someone does something wrong, it costs other people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
The whole group suffers for mistakes. So.
Okay. So that's first phase of training. How long does it take? And
Boot camp is 13 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
and they separate it into 4-week periods.
Right.
And third phase, you go to Camp Pendleton, and that's where you do the whole crucible and all that stuff. So
Well,
rifle range.
So the first phase is just to learn to march, follow the orders, get discipline.
Right,
stage.
basic stuff, and learning the obstacle course and Marine Corps martial arts program. You start that.
Okay. And then the second phase?
Second phase is a little more advanced stuff. You start doing some bayonet training and learning to move like you should.
Do you ever need a bayonet for anything when you're actually out in the field?
We always wanted to, but apparently there's a time and place for that. We didn't encounter that.
Okay. Well, that may be just as well. All right. So basically you spent about 2 months there in San Diego, and how tightly controlled is your time while you're there?
Very tightly. There was no time. We had an hour and a half on Sundays where you go to church, or you could sit if you didn't didn't believe or whatever, you would stay back in the squad bay and just sit there. Other than that, every second, when you lay down for bed at night, you're laying on your back and you hold your rifle in there and recite the rifleman's creed.
Wow.
And they tell you when to go to sleep and they tell you when to wake up. Everything. When you blink, every bit of it is controlled.
Okay. Then up at Camp Pendleton, then you talked, because you did field exercises and weapons training and so forth. You referred to something called the Crucible. What's that?
Well, it's roughly a 3-day event of a lot of marching and carrying heavy pack, and they have different things you stop at along the way and team exercises, and it just goes on and on. You get 3 meals, it's sleep deprivation, and so you're hungry, tired, you have to just keep going.
And what do you learn out of that?
You learn toughness and dealing with discomfort and things that as a civilian you take for granted. They're turning into ignore pain, ignore hunger, especially the sleep part.
Okay. Now, how many people, do they train you in platoons, companies? What do they label your unit?
Platoons.
Okay, and how many in the platoon to start with?
Right around 110.
Okay. And now, did people drop out along the way?
Yes, they would come and go, but it was hard to really get to know your whole platoon because there was no free time. You just knew the faces of people around you. But yeah, there would be people that would get hurt on the obstacle course or in the martial arts program or in various things that just either they couldn't do a specific thing and they were going to be held back, or they were mentally cracking and wanted to commit suicide or whatever the case may be, so they had to go to get help for that.
Mm-hmm. Now, were there people who would decide just, I don't want to do this and leave, or was that an option?
Yes, that people would, it's not an option to leave, but people would try to escape. And I don't know whatever happened to them. I'm sure there was some sort of process that they, other than honorable discharge or something, but there was definitely people that tried escaping, and that was...
Okay. Now, over the course of the 13 weeks, would you get people added to your unit?
Yes, there'd be people that were in platoons ahead of us that were ahead in the cycle that would be being brought back because they had to repeat either the rifle range or some sort of exercise that you need to pass.
So when you actually graduate at the end of that, do you have 110 people, or is it less than that?
It's less than that, yeah, definitely, because there's a lot of people that get injured.
Okay. Now, chronologically, when is this when you're actually going through the training? When is it? Is this like what year, what month roughly are you doing this?
Oh, I'm there in the summertime.
Okay, 2003?
2003.
Okay, so by then the invasion of Iraq has happened,
yes.
And we've been in Afghanistan for a couple of years already.
Mm-hmm.
Are you being told anything about that stuff
yes,
while you're training?
They really emphasized what we were doing there. This isn't peacetime. You guys are really training for war. Some of you will immediately go after you go to the School of Infantry or whatever your MOS school will immediately go. So there was a definite seriousness to what you were doing, and extra. They wanted extra out of you, I guess, than before.
Okay. Well, to impress on you, this is a serious business.
Yes.
Okay. So you finished. What did you do after you finished your 13 weeks? What's the next step for you?
For everybody, you get 10 days off. And like my parents had came out to see me graduate boot camp and stayed there for a couple days and actually seen San Diego. It was my first time in California. Came back home, hung out with friends, and then went back out to Camp Pendleton and checked into the School of Infantry.
All right. Now, did you have an infantry MOS, or were you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I chose that.
All right. So, and so you basically you volunteered to
yeah.
Just as a rifleman or specialized weapons training or?
No, I did. I was 0311, so that's your rifleman.
Right. Okay. Now, why did you pick that?
Well, that's what my grandfathers were, and if I was gonna join the Marines, I don't think there's any other jobs I'd want to do.
Okay.
Otherwise, I would have chose the Army.
There you go. All right. So you're doing it. So what does the School of Infantry consist of then?
It's very tough. We're out there right in the mountains. there's a lot of classroom time at first, and then learning different weapon systems, land nav courses, where you're sent out by yourself and have to find points, and you're out there for a long time. Long marches with heavy packs. They up the amount of weight you're carrying to 200 pounds with weapon systems.
How much did you weigh at the time?
When I first went to boot camp, I weighed 130 pounds. After boot camp, I was up to 150. By the time I started by the end of School of Infantry, I was up to 170. So.
And that's just adding muscle at that point,
Oh, yeah.
presumably. Yeah. I guess the distance runners kind of come in kind of skinny.
Oh, yeah.
But all right. But you had a 200 pounds worth of gear to carry.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you're doing that. Do they give you things like escape and evasion training or that sort of stuff?
Yeah, that comes later, and it's not as in depth. It's just a quicker one. They have actually courses that you can take for that. Because you're always learning stuff, so they do your basic weapon system, basic movement, and then they started putting together mock towns of what we would encounter in Afghanistan or Iraq, and a lot of the training was focused on that type of warfare. We had different courses we had to go through, movement through under wires and attacking trenches and all that too, so you knew how to do that type of training. You get, of course, their favorite thing was to gas us when we were going up the mountain carrying gear. Get ready for that kind of stuff, gas attacks, and constantly putting on your mask because that was a fear at that time.
Mm-hmm. That whole chemical weapons thing.
Yeah.
What was going on?
So they would always pop those just to get you ready.
All right. Did you learn things like house-to-house searching, or was that...
Right. That was all. You're learning very basics there. Very basics. This was all... It was a thing that was constantly changing and shifting. You could always learn, and you're starting to hear stories come back from Afghanistan. One of my platoon sergeants there had been in Afghanistan, so he was giving some good advice, and everybody was listening. You want to know what it's like, and really curious. And so.
Okay. So how long were you in the School of Infantry?
That lasted maybe just over 2 months.
Okay. And now, what's your next step after that?
The next step after that was to come back to Michigan. Well, I had screwed up my contract a little bit because in the School of Infantry I was chosen to try out for recon. Mm-hmm. So I went through a recon NDOC and passed that and realized how awful the swimming portion was, and was told how they did open water swims in the ocean, and I was just not about sharks and that sort of stuff. So that screwed up what unit I was going to a little bit. So I went back to this company in Michigan and was on their INI staff as an active member. Originally I had signed up for reserves, mm-hmm. so I could go back to school, but I remained on active because the company I was joining was activated at that time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so basically that's a Marine Reserve unit that
mm-hmm.
you're joining? Okay. And then what is that unit designation?
That was 124.
Okay, so 1st Battalion, 24th Marine Regiment. Okay. All right. Now when you come back, did that have people who'd been any place, or were they all waiting to go for the first time?
They were deployed, and they were deciding whether to send us or not. And they decided not to because it was at the end of their deployment. So we just were doing more training, more just basically classroom stuff, and busy work around there.
So was the rest of the battalion over there and coming back?
Correct. They were what I had heard was that they were just mainly at that time the reserve units were just guarding bases
mm-hmm.
Along the Kuwaiti border. And that's where they were at that time. They were getting ready to come back.
All right. So you're just hanging out mostly, or cleaning things, or
working out, cleaning, and just constantly learning about, they have the learning your knowledge about different radio operations and all the different stuff that you have to learn.
Yeah. And with a reserve unit like that, then there's no base to live on, so you have.
Correct. They give you a housing allowance to. So I just stayed with a buddy that lived in Saginaw there, so I didn't have to rent an apartment or anything. So.
Okay, so they sent you to it because your unit was in Saginaw. It wasn't the unit that's based in Grand Rapids.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So how long does that go on?
Well, that went for 3 months, and they arrived a month after I had joined. They arrived back from Kuwait, and then the people that were left there were sent to Poland to train with Russians and 7 different nations from all over there.
Okay, tell us a little bit about that. What's
Well,
going
we
on
did
there?
an amphibious assault when we first got there. That was the first training exercise, and so we were on the Baltic and got on the World War II style Polish landing track vehicles and stormed the beaches and had a fake battle with this. I can't remember the name of the gear, but it's like this big game of laser tag almost. They have different systems you wear, and we did that against the Russians and the Russian Spetsnaz and Germans. So.
All right. What kind of impression did you have of the people from other countries who were there?
The Germans were really good. They were disciplined like we were, but the rest of the other countries, you really see where America stands out. The discipline, just everything. We wanted to be there. We were volunteer. The majority of the Russians were forced. You had to serve 2 years, so you could tell they didn't want to be there, and they acted that way. Very undertrained. I was brand new, and I looked like I was a seasoned vet compared to them of different things we were doing while we were there, rifle ranges and how well we could shoot as opposed to them.
Okay, so it's no longer you're no longer in the Cold War, and it's no longer the fearsome image of the Red Menace or anything else like that.
No.
Yeah, it's not Soviet Union. So, okay, how long did you spend on that exercise?
That was about 5 weeks,
Okay.
4 or 5 weeks we were there.
All right, and then were you stuck on military bases or ships the whole time?
No, they had a Air Force base, I believe it was, in Utka, Poland that we stayed at, and it was interesting. That was my first time out of the country and experiencing a lot of different people from all those countries. It was a good time, learned a lot.
Okay, and then you go back to Saginaw at that point, or?
Right, and then they released us to. I got my contract sorted out, and I was gonna re-enroll in college, and then they told us we were gonna be deployed. So I just stopped that, and then it turned out we weren't. So I got some odd jobs, and I didn't know really what to do with myself. So I went back to the Reserve Center and asked if I could be on active duty there again, because I wish I would have just joined full time. It was too hard. You didn't know when you were going to go or not to really plan out the rest of your life. So that went on for a while, working there and doing odd jobs, just working out and getting ready. Every month we go out and do training exercises out in the field, and intel was coming back about what type of training was working and what guys were doing over there at the time. So we did that, and then in mid 2005 we received word that we are definitely going to be deployed, and so we started lengthening the amount of time we were in the field, and then in early 2006 we went out to California as a unit to start the workup training. They send you to you do a lot of different huge courses, ranges out there, assault courses where they're shooting mortars over your head and you're calling for fire, machine gun fire over your heads, and really crazy stuff. So
Now, are they doing that out in the Mojave Desert or at Camp Pendleton? Or
this started at Camp Pendleton. There's ranges all over. We were at Camp Pendleton and Camp Porno in Camp Pendleton. And we did ranges there for 2 or 3 months. And then we went out to 29 Palms, California, where we did huge combined arms exercises. They have a whole mock-up village of Iraqi towns, and there's guys there that are running the towns that have already been to Iraq and had fought. So they were telling us stuff they learned and passing on everything they knew.
all right. Now, as the prospect of actually going over there gets closer, I mean, are you looking forward to finally getting to use the training, or wondering what the heck you're doing there?
Yes, I was looking forward to. I was hearing guys that had been there, and I wanted to go. I've been in for almost 3 years at this point. And
Now, are you older than a lot of the guys who were there?
yeah, there was a wide mix of people. So I had moved up fast in the rank because of staying on, and so I was able to be in charge of people. So there was older guys that weren't in charge of anybody, and I think that would have been a little more awkward.
But did you have a fair number of 19-year-olds and things like that in there?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a few. About 19 was the youngest, but so.
Okay. All right. So once you complete the training in California, do you go home, or now do you get staged and go overseas, or?
Right. They let us home in between the training in Camp Pendleton and 29 Palms. 29 Palms. Once we got there at Camp Wilson, which is the old Kwanzaa huts in the middle of that's your first taste of desert heat. Step off the bus and it's like you're in a furnace. So in between those Camp Pendleton and that, we got to go home for a week and say goodbye, because we were going right there for 4 more weeks and then overseas.
All right. What did your family think of all this?
Well, my dad was really proud, and everybody was really proud of me, but my mom was constantly crying, and at this time I had gotten married and we were having a baby, so in between my training in California and 29 Palms, my first daughter was born, so I got to come home. It just happened that it was at the right timing, so I got to hold my daughter for a few days, and then so that kind of added extra to the whole situation.
Sure. All right. So now, what's the process? Okay, so you went 29 Palms, and how long were you there roughly before you ship out?
4 or 5 weeks.
Okay.
And that training was really, really beneficial training, because it was in a very similar environment. They had actors, they had shoot houses that used sim rounds, that like paintballs, so it seemed like there were real bullets coming at you, and fake explosions. It was like a movie set. So they put actual scenarios that had already happened overseas of what you could encounter on the streets. And
Now, did you know where you were going?
at this point, yes, we didn't know until we got to Camp Wilson.
Okay.
So they didn't want us telling anybody when we were back. So once we got to Camp Wilson, we were told. There had been rumors. There's always rumors, and of where.
Now, during this time between when you first were training originally and now you're out in 29 Palms, how much attention had you paid to kind of the news of what was going on in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Quite a bit. I followed that quite a bit, what was happening there, and what I found out later is a lot of it's tainted. You hear actual stories from units when they get back what happened, and seeing on the news, it's 2 different accounts, and most of the time. So,
Now, as far as you can tell, the stuff that you were seeing before you went over, was the news version exaggerated or more negative than it could have been? Or?
More negative. At first, it seemed like it was positive because everybody was. We took over Iraq quick in the initial push, and then there was insurgency that started up with the IEDs, and once that started going, there was a lot of negative about civilians that were getting caught in the middle of it. So
yeah, and the Abu Ghraib thing came up, and
that did not help. that was definitely a low point there for all military.
Right. Okay. So now, how do they get you from 29 Palms out to Iraq?
Oh, it's a commercial airline. Fly into Germany, sit there for a while, and then fly commercial into Kuwait. And then in Kuwait, we stayed there for maybe just 2 days. It was real quick. And we were bused to an airfield and put on a C-130 cargo plane, packed on a C-130 cargo plane, and had an hour and a half flight, and they call it TQ, a big air base, in the Anbar province, and did our combat landing, because they don't just cruise down nice and easy like a civilian airliner. They go in a circular motion fast, so they don't get hit by rockets if they're coming in at a nice angle. So that's not the most pleasant landing.
All right. And now, once the plane lands, what happens?
From there, we spent another night there, and these are the big bases that we had seen on the news and stuff where celebrities visit.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh, this isn't so bad. They had Taco Bell and flushing toilets and stuff. And then we were put on helicopters and flown into camp. It was called Camp Baharia. It was just outside of Fallujah. It was one of Saddam's son's palaces, huge estate, walled compound. And from there we were put on a convoy the next day of Humvees and went just north of the city to an abandoned train station that had been made into a forward operating base, and that was going to be our home.
All right. Now, was your whole battalion there, or company, or?
The company, they split up. The company at Camp Baharia, we split up, and we had went in waves. Not everybody. This wasn't all everybody at once. Even our unit, we went with the leaders first, and then everybody like E3 and below kind of follow on. So we trickled into this train station and started doing a takeover transition with the other unit that was there. They were showing us, walking us around the wire, showing us where the weak points were, where we should keep armed, just everything we needed to know.
Okay. What did the situation there seem to be at the time? What had that unit been doing?
Oh, it was getting worse because we were arriving right around Ramadan, where these people really want to die apparently because they get something extra, I guess, in their death, some sort of martyrdom. So it had really been amping up, and they looked to hit units when they're transitioning, and we had been told this. So right from the start, I received my combat action ribbon. When we arrived there, it got mortared. There was a V-bed that hit the front gate the next day.
A V-bed?
It was a vehicle-borne IED.
Okay.
Killing some of the Marines that were just about to leave and go home just hours before. So.
Wow. Okay. Now, in the broader sense, I mean, do you have any sense of what's sort of going on in the area, or what kind of missions that your unit is supposed to perform?
Yes, they had told us we were going to be trying to use a different type of patrolling to gather information, because they were finding by just going to certain people's houses, if those people cooperated, those people ended up dead the next day. So we would go to a whole, we were given different sections of the city, was broken up to the different units, and we would go around the area starting off because we didn't know much what was going on there, so it was just getting to know the area, going every house to house. We were just knocking on the doors and introducing ourselves, and they had this point they had been given like a we call them Gencia, but it was just like basically a driver's license that the military had issued to them for all military age males, and we would run that and see if they were supposed to be in the city. And that's kind of how we first started off.
So when you go in and knock on a door, if nobody answers, what do?
We would go at that point unless we had any sort of this was the first couple weeks of us being there. Unless there was a reason, we weren't going to start wrecking these people's houses right away.
And to what proportion? I mean, were a lot of people there when opening their doors?
Yes, yeah, they were all friendly at first, and it was the ones that we started to learn that were the friendliest were the ones that were hiding something. So, yeah, you start to learn their mannerisms and learn these people, but that was just the first couple weeks. Then we started getting hit with IEDs and everything. They had a lot of snipers in the area, that sort of stuff going on. And once we started that type of contact, we were able to get some of these individuals and start gathering intel. That we had a good intel group that started processing these people fast and getting out good information to us on targets to hit. And so we started hitting, after about a month there, started hitting every other night people's places that had weapons, caches, and just people that we needed to catch.
Now, what kind of relationships seem to exist between the Americans and like the local officials and authorities? I mean, were they working together at this point?
Yes, we were working closely. We had sent, there was higher ranking officers and enlisted men that were integrated with Iraqi police forces and the Iraqi army. My squad, we had some Iraqi army guys that would come out with us occasionally, and they had their own sectors that they were in charge of too. So there was a lot of, at that point, working with Iraqi army, strengthening them. And at that point, some of the higher up intel guys were working with local sheikhs through the Iraqi army to fight. A lot of these people didn't want these insurgents around. They were just, but they didn't also want to side with the losing side. So they were careful who to trust, because they didn't know when we were going to leave. And they didn't want to die.
So, now you were, while you're there, you basically working out of a forward operating base? Or
correct.
Okay.
We would set it up with our three, we had 3 platoons, and we would set up a rotation where we'd be manning the base, manning the forward operating base, which it would be guard duty, and that would be basically your relaxed time. You would just, because not everybody in the platoon would be out there. You'd rotate through, and that's when we could, call home, actually rest a little bit, and shower up and stuff. Then we had other forward bases of that were just abandoned houses in key parts of the city, and we'd go out, each squad would be 8 or 9 guys, sometimes 12, would be put in an abandoned house that was beefed up a little bit with stuff. And
how long would you stay in a place like that?
3 to 4 days.
Okay. And what would you do while you're there?
We would get attacked, and the main reason for them being there was they were put on routes where a lot of IEDs had been planted. So they had overlapping fields of fire between these buildings down a main MSR that they used to, some other adjacent units had convoys going through that they needed to get through. So
okay, an MSR, is that a supply route?
The main supply route, yeah.
Right.
So there was that, and then we would go to the combat patrol, and that's where the real stuff started happening.
So there, would you have a target to go after, or just walk out and to see what happened?
There was some of that. It was a mix of everything. You would really go nonstop, just maybe sleep for 2-3 hours, and especially when we started losing people, sleep was not happening. You go from one thing to the next.
Now, are you doing everything on foot at this point, or?
We would do a mix. They were constantly watching you. So we would mix it up where we'd leave the base, how we would leave it, what times. And it was all mission dependent. If we had to get somewhere fast because someone was only going to be there for a little bit, we would take vehicles. But each had their own downfall. Vehicles, you were slower moving, and just it was easier to be attacked by IEDs, and so everybody had mixed feelings. I'd rather be dismounted.
Mm-hmm.
Felt like I had a little more control.
All right. Now, did you have a sense that part of what you were doing was just kind of maintaining a presence in a community? I mean, if you're there, then the bad guys can't take over.
There was some of that, but the guys in charge of us, they were really aggressive, and they wanted to fix this problem.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, they were realizing that the presence wasn't working, so they were trying different. This was Iraq-wide. They were trying different ways to get the people on our side, because they realized we had to strengthen them for this to work. So.
Okay. Because some of what you're describing sounds a little bit like elements that were in the later surge strategy, where you have small units across a larger area, and they'll come out and fight you, but then they lose.
Mm-hmm.
And you establish your strength, and then people will work with you.
Yeah.
But at this point, it's still more, you're kind of there looking to actually engage an enemy or
Yes.
prevent them from operating in certain ways. You're not really worrying about the civilian community as much? They're just there? Or?
There was different groups. I was a rifleman, so they had different groups that were out. If we wrecked somebody's property due to some sort of firefight, they could go to a bigger base there and see somebody. I don't know the correct terms for what these people were doing. I was there to fight, and we would help out people when we could, and pass out bottles of water or whatnot. But the main thing was there were snipers everywhere, and we wanted to get home to our families too. So.
Now, how did you spend your entire Iraq tour in that area?
Yes.
Okay. How many months was that?
It was about 9 months, I think.
Okay. And did you notice the situation changing at all over the course of that time?
Yes. At first, we were attacked quite a bit, and it really started to phase out. We started hitting a lot more targets every night, going to people's houses and getting high value targets off the big big list, top 10 targets for all of Iraq.
Okay. And if you are approaching a house now, I mean, did you have to vary your procedure, or was there a standard way of doing things?
There's no standard way of doing anything. Because, like I said, they watched us do everything. So everything we did was different. We varied our routes, how we entered houses. Sometimes we would go next door. If we wanted to go to a particular house, we'd go next door, go to the top of their house, and cross over on the rooftop. Because there was a lot of booby traps on these houses we were doing raids on.
And would you go through walls rather than doors, or?
If it was a hard raid, if we had intel like this, there's real bad people in this, and it was good intel, we would just wreck their place. We would blow up the wall or do what we had to do because there was a lot of booby traps. We weren't going to take chances when it was 100% intel. But.
Now, if you were less sure about something and you're approaching a house, what might you do?
Well, we would always take a nearby. What our unit started doing, it depended on. A lot of times we go out, we'd have a fire team go up on a rooftop of a adjacent building, and the people might be home, and you'd go in there nicely to the house that you're not hitting, and have them get them all in like their living room, and just calm them down, and then two people would go to the rooftop, provide overwatch, and then you would just go in. You would go in your target and hope there wasn't something there.
Now, were you still breaking in, or were you knocking first?
Well, that's what we had. Hard raids with good intel, and we were not knocking. We were kicking doors down. And it was a wide mix of it. It just depended on what the intel was. If it was just suspected, we might just open the door, or we'd have our hooligan tools, we call them, and we would break in. And if it turned out to be nothing, we would give them the card that they could get their door replaced or whatever we broke getting in.
How did the civilians kind of deal with this stuff, or how did they seem to view you at this point?
At this point, it was a big mix. There was a lot that really liked what we were doing. When we'd come in, they would give us tea, and they were really happy we were there and shaking our hands. And um, these insurgents were terrible. They would behead anybody. They were hurting their kids, just awful things, just terrorizing these people. So that's all they really knew is under Saddam they were terrorized, and then there was the insurgency, and then they were kind of caught in the middle of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And you at least tended not to behead anybody.
Correct.
And would pay for damage periodically. So,
Yeah.
okay. So on some level, then, whatever is going there does seem to be working.
There really started to be big groups once the sheikhs got into this and started convincing people.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we started getting a lot more intel. 'Cause
Right.
they started giving up their neighbors and everybody else. So.
All right. Now, you talked a little bit about this already. I mean, to what extent do you have downtime? I mean, when you're on a base, somebody's got to be, guarding the wire or whatever.
Yeah, this is a small base. I mean, you could throw a football across the whole thing. So, it's not a big area, and there really wasn't a downtime. I mean, you'd get back from doing something, you'd have shifts on these posts that were 12 hours, and these posts would get shot at too. And we'd be mortared there. But there was usually you'd have like a 4-hour block, and you have to clean your rifle and make sure that's working properly. Maybe do some laundry and some makeshift washing machine, and sleep. So I mean, you're just constantly going.
And when you're out in one of these outposts, then a couple of you can sleep at a time, and
Right. For the abandoned houses in the city, that was interesting. You were on your own, and they would hit those places hard. They'd start off with RPGs, pepper in the sides, and they could never get in them though. We had them.
well, would they actually try to assault, or were they just?
Yes. Yeah. So you had to be. This wasn't something that you could sleep on. They would be coming with all sorts of stuff. They'd usually try to hit one side with RPGs, then you knew that they were going to be coming up the back side with some guys with small arms. So.
All right. Now, did you have what amounted to close calls, or points when they were getting close to getting in, or would you scare them off pretty quickly?
We had each one of these buildings had these were really rich people's houses at one point. They had a huge wall around the outside. So we had that as a perimeter, which was probably, each building was different, but about 30 yards out you had the barrier, and so that was hard for them to get in because we were on the rooftops. We had stuff to thermal scopes and everything up there, so they tried, but they didn't get into the wall.
Mm-hmm.
So.
All right. And do you have, I mean, was this, now did that get less common by the latter part of the tour? Did they give up or just show up less often?
They would try to, as it went on, at first they tried to hit it and actually take it, but then it just started being, there would be snipers, so you just had to really be, that people got hit. There was a lot of that. That was a huge threat. That and IEDs was the worst things.
Now, do you have a sense of what kind of losses your company took while you were out there?
Yeah. Especially, I mean, in the company it's easy, and battalion wide, they would let us know if there was people hurt and who it was and stuff. So that there was a lot of that.
In the battalion as a whole, about how many personnel were there?
Guys, infantry guys actually fighting between 900 and 1,000.
And then what proportion of them become casualties?
There was 23 that were killed, and there was different, some of the wounded came back and fought, so it was in between 90, 120 that were wounded.
Yeah, so it's substantial but not catastrophic.
Correct.
Yeah, so you can still function effectively as a unit.
I'm sorry.
All right. Now, yourself, did you basically just carry a rifle, or did you have other weapons?
We had a Connex box. It was a big metal box that we could check out weapons, and mission dependent. We could take, there was everything. We took, I like to carry a Brunelli shotgun with a lock busting round to open up outside gates and for houses, and then I carried an M16 with a 203 grenade launcher. Sometimes I would carry a 249 saw, depending on what we were doing.
Okay, and that's effectively an automatic weapon, so
Correct.
light machine gun kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. I have to keep track of the acronyms for benefit of the audience here.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Are there particular, now I guess, did you get any time back in a larger rear area base during your tour?
No.
You're always out there
Always out
at,
there.
at Fallujah. Okay. Are there other particular incidents or things that kind of stand out in your memory at the time that you were there?
Just a lot of the actual, like the IEDs, when my friend was hit, like that was 9 days after being there, and those bombs that they were using, at that time we had just upgraded our Humvees, and they were supposed to be these indestructible things. Well, they upgraded the IEDs and used 3 155 shells, which are huge.
Big artillery run, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what hit right behind my vehicle and hit his. But just the use of what we started to do when we were getting shot at, the use of smoke, we would use that quite a bit to mask our movements, especially with the snipers. So that was a beneficial thing we had.
Okay. Now your vehicles are usually just Humvees?
Right, and then we had a big 7 tons that they were troop carriers. It was, the tires are about 5-6 feet tall, and they could withstand a little bit bigger blasts, and we would take those out sometimes to hit targets. Or
All right. So now, when does the Iraq tour wind up? When do you finish?
in 2007, well, during that time, another thing that stood out was this was when Saddam was hung. I was there, and people were celebrating, and then there was people also. Then the insurgencies decided that they were going to start coming out real big that night too. So that was an interesting time to be there when this was all happening, when he was hung. So we left in April 2007 in the same staggered way. So.
All right. Now, at this point, had you re-enlisted once already, or was this all one enlistment you were on?
This was all one enlistment.
Okay. And then you come home. Now what do you do?
I came home and I had 30 days off. I found myself coming from combat to 2 weeks later. I was sitting on the floor of the living room with a 9-month-old baby that I had no idea. So I was the realization that where I was 2 weeks ago, and now I'm sitting here with a baby trying to figure out how to be a dad. That was
okay. Now, when you come back, do they do anything to try to sort of help you transition?
Yeah, they do, but they had to have psychologists and all this, but no one wanted to say anything because you didn't want to stay there longer. You just wanted to get home. So, because we had landed in California and we had a few days there to decompress. And from the time we landed in the States, I think when I finally seen my wife, it was 5 days, 4 or 5 days. So you didn't want to stay there longer, so you didn't say anything. You just got through what you needed to get through.
Okay. Now, but for you, this is just a 30-day leave, and you go back to duty again after that.
Right at that base, yeah. I was trying to figure out what I was gonna do, if I was gonna stay on there, and then an opportunity come up to go to the Dominican Republic and train Haitians and on raid tactics and stuff that we were doing, because they were it was like their form of DEA, because it's a big jumping point for drugs in the U.S. So we were down there doing rifle ranges and movement through urban areas, urban assaults and stuff, training them.
What impression did you have of the Haitians you were working with?
Poorly equipped, very scary people. They were very good with martial arts, but very violent people. That was a whole different type of not as friendly as meeting the Russians and Polands, and
Hmm.
so
Okay. About how long was that job?
that was about 5 weeks.
Okay.
And then I decided to just I had found a job, a civilian job, and decided to just go to the reserve status for the rest of the time after that, with just drilling once a month.
Okay. So you are kind of transitioning yourself back into life as a civilian, and you're not going to re-up or anything at that stage.
Right. Yeah, my wife was really against it. So yeah, she was too scared when I was there. So.
Okay. While you were over there, I mean, how much contact did you have with home?
We had a sat phone, and when we would have the downtime at our home base in
Mhm.
between our shifts, I would quick get in a call. I didn't like to call much because a few times when I was called, we were attacked. So that really freaked her out. So I tried to limit what I was doing, and I did some emails, but that was not as effective. I wrote actually a lot of regular letters. 'Cause that was I wrote one every day that I could. I would work on one here and there and send it out. So.
Yeah, because you hear sometimes people on the bigger bases, they're emailing all the time or using
Yeah.
Skype and all
Well,
kinds
we
of
seen
things
that
like
on the way out. I mean,
Mhm.
that was I just missed Chuck Norris at one of the big bases visiting the frontline troops. And so, yeah, we were ahead of those people, so we didn't get any of those frills of flushing toilets and any of that. But that's what I joined
All
up for.
right. What did you find maybe most challenging about just adjusting to being back home again?
Being in crowds, they reused the civilian population there for suicide bombers and a lot of stuff. In the IEDs, there's a lot of trash. You were constantly looking for that, and it was a challenge. I had my wife drive a lot because I couldn't at first because it was not safe. Just expecting there to be an IED, and
So you're reacting to too many things.
I couldn't go in public places for a long time. That took some time.
All right. And then what kind of work did you have once you got back?
I was a supervisor at a distribution company, and I did that until 2015 when I came back to Grand Valley. I decided that was not the route I wanted to take the rest of my life, and decided to use the GI Bill and
And so what are you studying here now?
high school history teacher.
Ah. So you can become homework in your own class now.
Correct.
All right. And how far are you now in your program?
I'm in my senior year, so I got this year, and then I got the education.
Okay, so you kind of get
to
out
student
on
teaching.
the field
Yeah.
and do that. So you kind of look back. So when did you officially go out of the Marines then?
Well, they place you in the IRR, which is nothing, but you're still on the books. So when I actually got my discharge was 2011.
Okay, but this sort of inactive reserve is the label for it. Is that the IRR?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So 2009, I was done doing any sort of drilling or anything, wearing the uniform, basically.
Right. Okay. I guess to look back at your time in the Marine Corps, what do you think you took out of it?
A lot of leadership skills, hard work. I was just your typical college kid before, and you join that, it really puts the work ethic in, and I learned a lot. I mean, meet a lot of people. It really expands your horizon. Meet so many people, and going through that.
Yeah. How did it affect your relationship with the people who had been your friends before you left? I mean, was anything different?
Well, for the people that I was not in the military, I had a hard time with, but a lot of my friends had also joined, so we still hold that bond that they were in the Army, they were deployed, or the Navy and different things, so we all have that commonality.
Okay, so there is a group there that you can connect with.
Yeah, all the guys that I ran cross country with in high school, we all joined a different service. So.
All right. Well, let's see. You managed to successfully cover just exactly an hour, which is how long this tape is. So
Okay.
it's like a thank you for taking the time to share the story today.